Hello and welcome to Behind the Stethoscope. This is Dr. Raisha Noorani, and I'm really pleased to introduce our podcast speaker today. That's Dr. Emily Adams. Emily is a GP in Croydon. She comes from a really interesting background where she did a little bit of teaching as a secondary school teacher before she made her way to the best of all careers, general practice. It's really interesting because I first met Emily and it was almost like we had the same job plan and we were the same place in life, because she's got her working life and she works as a GP partner. She does 6 sessions. She's got very similar interests in terms of women's health, medical education, and then actually a really full on personal life. 4 kids, married. What did you say, Emily? It was 3 chickens, 2 cats, and a dog. Is that right?
You got it.
So there's some sort of camaraderie, I think, when you meet someone who has got such a busy professional life, but especially when they've got the same going on in their personal life. So lots and lots for me to sort of reflect on, I think, when we're talking today. But actually, I just want to start right back at the beginning. And A, is that a fair reflection of life? And B, tell us a bit more. How did you come to doing general practice or doing medicine? Maybe when we start with that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Raisha, as well, it was very memorable for me meeting you as well. And you may not know this, but I had actually, when I was preparing for my CSA, I had actually watched one of your videos. So I
Oh
knew
dear.
your name. So it was a lovely connection to make. And I know we've shared various parts of the journey since then. So my journey into medicine was not a straight line. So hopefully that can be an encouragement to anyone who feels they've not necessarily taken the path of least resistance. And so I actually did a biology undergraduate degree. Now sitting here being a doctor often rings in my head my mum, who spent most of my teenage years saying, medicine would suit you perfectly. You should really do medicine. And my father was a vet, and so maybe I'd sort of I don't know whether that had perhaps made me think it was a bit too all-consuming, or I don't know. Something within me thought I needed to not do the obvious thing, I guess.
A rebellious teenager, Emily, isn't it? I'm not going to do what they suggest.
Exactly that. And in fact, I remember my work experience very specifically. I was like, no, I want to go to London. I want to go to the streets of paper gold, all of that. I went and I did work experience in a law firm. And I just had this completely, now I realise, unrealistic vision of what my life was going to look like. And, I was going to be sort of living that flash city lifestyle. But anyway, luckily I, over the years, sort of realised that wasn't quite where my value set really was found. So so I did a biology degree in the first instance. And funny enough, it was in the first term of that degree that I started to meet some medics and had a little bit of a sort of existential, I think I should have done that after all. And my mum again said, well, funny enough, they've just started a graduate entry medicine program. So that's something, you haven't missed that boat effectively. And so I carried on with my biology degree, and I guess that was there in the back of my mind. But I must admit, I then got really into my degree, and I sort of, just got into various things around kind of research, and life went on. And to be honest, I would say at that point in my life, personal life things took probably a precedent. So I did things out of a matter of a little bit more convenience. So I finished my degree and then did a PGCE in Oxford. And then from that went on to do a period of time as a secondary school teacher. but it was all along just still there. Or, you know, I haven't quite made, if you like, my um, active step in what I want to necessarily give my life to. So it was a little bit always more one step at a time, reactive. So yeah, so at that point I applied for the graduate entry medicine and it went from there.
Amazing, amazing. I love that. I love how it's sort of remained like a constant feature in the background. And there was sort of early, it's a bit like when there's always a few early signs. But then what made you take the plunge and go, well, this is it now. I'm ready to now actually apply. And it became, like you say, from that more passive kind of thought process into an active step.
That's a really good question. My mother-in-law was a GP. So I remember going and sort of testing the reality of whether that really was something that I wanted to do. And I remember going to her surgery, and she was an incredible GP, but also had she really valued work-life balance as
Yeah.
well. And it was kind of in the old days, so she used to drive to work and then come back for a siesta. So there was that kind of thing there still. Um, but I do remember going that time. There were some graduate entry students there, and I don't know, she was looking at some blood results or something.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, you know, we've had this fascinating afternoon of being with people and watching people, but now I've actually got a kind of intellectual challenge to get my head round.
Yes.
And that for me, I was just like, yeah, this is the coming together of the two things that I realistically do really love, you know, kind of using your brain and analytical, and then but also actually people and real life. So I think that did confirm things for me.
I love that. I love that. And it's very true, isn't it? You know, you look at personal statements for people who apply for medicine, and it is that it's you've clearly got this scientific thing going on and curiosity for science, which is probably why you went into do biology as opposed to law or maybe something else. But then it's that kind of actually the authentic medicine is very much about patient centered and working in teams of people, and you're not a scientist with just your glasses working in a silo as such. And I guess was it always GP then when you went to decide to do postgraduate medicine? Was it general practice, or were you kind of open to all the specialties, or what was it like?
Yeah, so I I have to say I had the most fantastic course that I did. And the reason why I loved it and why I think it suited me is it was case-based discussion from the off. And I remember even kind of year one,
Yeah.
although I had a science background, you know, the medicine was all entirely new, but it was straight in there with kind of group discussions and cases and inquiry. And I think from that very beginning moment, I loved the sort of diagnostic
Yeah.
process. So that sort of, here's a presenting problem, now you try and solve it in all its complexity. And you obviously then go on and you do all your different placements and so many things that I really enjoy. But I think ward-based medicine is quite different. Um, you know, you've often got a diagnosis in place, you're into management, refining management, dealing with complications. There's less of that clinical reasoning, diagnostic processing. And that's where I really found a kind of passion for that. And still to this day, that is what I absolutely love. And so I think I was one of the few people who just was always wanting to have an A&E place,
Yeah.
for example,
Yeah.
because it's the exact same thing. I mean, I loved working in A&E, and I think that would have, you know, when you asked if you'd been at a different life stage and things, would you? I think if anything, that would have been. If I hadn't had the journey into teaching, I suspect I may have had a journey into A&E. And one of the things about doing my GP training part time, somehow I managed to get to spend 18 months in A&E.
Did
So,
you? They must have loved you.
oh, do you know, Rachel, you might be able to relate to this, but I often look back at it now and I think because you know, the shift pattern was such that at the time I remember thinking, this is absolutely incredible, because, you know, my shifts were like, I think I worked 1 8 to 5 day. Then my next day was 4 till 1 in the morning. So I was like, this is amazing. I can be with the kids all day. Then I can go to work, and then I'll get back at 1. And then like the next day it was an evening shift, 2 till 10. And again, I'd have the morning with the kids, put them for their nap. And I just remember thinking, this is incredible. Like I feel like I'm seeing the kids all the time, and I'm working. But obviously it did take its toll. But the other thing that was nice about A&E, and I think is very true for GP as well, is the job is the same as a part-timer. And there are not many things like that.
Yes.
So I really realised that. I was like, I'm just a person turning up, doing my job, seeing a new patient. And it is the same with GP clinics, you know, whether you're doing 8 or 4 in a week or whatever in between, you know, you're doing that same job.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really conducive, isn't it? Because it's each episode, each patient interaction is it's almost like its own individual episode, and it works really well. But then in many ways, it's not part-time, because we always talk to GPs who go, yeah, I'm meant to be doing this many hours, but it's so much longer than that, isn't it, in practice? And you know, when I always say, when I speak to VTS trainees, you know, if you're talking about doing sort of half days, you just need to remember it's very unlikely that it will remain a half day. So you might be better off just doing it as a full day and accepting that this is my working day. I don't know. Is the realities of once you become a GP slightly different? Did they challenge you? Did you kind of look at it and go, "Oh, this is not what I expected," or did you kind of fall into it and go, "I'm ready for this"?
So I think, you know, every season of life has a slightly different flavour, doesn't it? And for me, in the stage that I'm in right now, I think I take the fact, because you're quite right, you go for a half day and you're going to be there, and you know what the school day is like. By the time you drop them off, you can only fit half an hour back in there.
Yeah.
But I think I've sort of taken the active decision that there might be a slight cost in that. That might not be the ideal way to work forever, but actually right now that enables me to balance and be able to pick up from school at least, you know, some of the time. And I think going back to what the reality of GP is like, yes, you know, the days are long, aren't they? You know, a 2 day, it's definitely, you know, and a half day, one is going to be, you know, you're probably going to be there for 5 hours. You know, but on the other hand, there is flexibility in the system, and you can have some ownership. And I think, you know, it's all about working in a team and being prepared to bit of give and take. And, you know, I must admit, I haven't ever had to sort of, you know, miss a sports day, for example, of my kids. Because as long as I've known in advance, there is that little bit of flexibility to say, okay, can I move my clinic times? And so I still maintain that it allows much greater flexibility than a lot of jobs might do.
And that's no easy feat when you've got 4 kids and you've got 4 sports days to attend.
Yeah. And 4 mums races, obviously, to train up. So yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I guess in a way it's less bureaucratic though, isn't it? So it's almost as though it can, you're right, the days are long, but you don't necessarily need to go through a rota coordinator at a hospital and find someone to cover your shift because you're the only on call on that day. So I think you're right in the sense that if you've got good practice, it can be really responsive to things going on in life, which is where the work-life balance comes in. I like that. That's very true.
And I think the flip side of that as well is at this point in life, you know, it's harder for me to utterly compartmentalize things. So there is a lot of logging on in the evening, you know.
Yeah.
That's again, it's my choice to do it that way. And I know for some people it works much better to never bring anything home, and you know, you'd be a little bit of it in control of your own destiny. Me right now, that works. It gives me the peace of mind that, let's say I was working Monday and Thursday, I was worried about a particular blood test, I could look at it in between time, things like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, it's a natural thing. And I often end up speaking to friends and they all kind of look at you as though, you go into general practice and I guess the ultimate flexibility is locum sessional work. Um, and both of us have kind of gone, no, we're not going to do that. But what stops you, Emily? What stops you kind of going, actually, I'll just be a locum. I'm quite happy to do that because is it ambition or motivation or where does it stem from?
Yeah, so I did have a little period of time doing the odd bit of locating. So I've done a few bits and bobs. So I think there can be a real role for that, and particularly actually when I moved to Croydon, I didn't know the area at all.
Yeah,
That was quite important because, like you say, actually practice culture and the specific setting has a big influence. So I felt that definitely had a place and was quite helpful.
yeah,
But I think one of the amazing things about medicine, but I would say probably especially GP and increasing GP, is it is such a team effort. And I think I've always, really seen the value in really knowing your team well, um, across the board, from those supporting you in administration, secretaries, but also, your allied clinicians who you might be working with, and to really kind of have that relational connection, which means that I think it does often allow us to deliver the kind of patient care we really want to. And I think as a learning GP as well, particularly sort of first 5 years, I think we do know quite a lot about the importance of feedback on our own decision making. And I felt I really have seen the importance of that you are able to make a decision on a given day and then look at it in a week's time or see the patient again,
yeah.
and all the kind of strategies that we use as GPs to enable us to manage the uncertainty that we deal with. Let me try a treatment course, let me give it a bit of time, let me, it's harder, not impossible, but harder to pick those things up, I think, as a locum. And I'm quite sure there's ways around it that you can find, but I think that learning process for me has been easier in a more established setup. Initially as a salaried GP and now as a partner. Um, things like our clinical meetings where you can bring a case and often have really interesting discussions and feel like you're constantly learning from those around you, really.
So actually, it's not that different from why you went into medicine in terms of when you talk about you like, or even why you went into GP, but you talk about the authenticity of making a diagnosis and actually, the complexity of what that might be like, and seeing, your reasoning skills change as you watch disease progress and patients progress, to then go, actually, this is what, I know we've tested for X, Y, and Z, but actually it's all of this, having had time to kind of follow you for a bit or follow your blood tests or your investigations, which almost, I guess, in a sessional, you're right in the sense that if you're a sessional GP, you see people once, often, hopefully, that the system works and you're not getting lots of reattendances, but actually you tend to probably see more acute, one of those quick diagnoses, whereas actually it's almost working out what you like and what you enjoy in medicine and general practice has kind of led you down the salaried and GP partnership pathway.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely think that's a big part of it. And you mentioned having that continuity in terms of like the kind of physiology of what's going on, but I think also the sort of social context. And
Yeah,
again, going back to why I love our job is, this patient walks into the room. I don't know, I could maybe give an example here of one that I had recently where it was someone who was really, really concerned about their feet. And I was looking at their feet and I couldn't really see anything.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, what's going on? And then finally there's this light bulb moment of, I'm going on a yoga retreat. And, so you suddenly just see that there's something very meaningful in someone's life that actually is driving their concerns.
Yes.
And another one I had was an older gentleman who came in, and he had pain in his right shoulder and his right knee. I was like, okay, that's a bit, it's a little bit odd. And
Yeah.
anyway, the consultation went on, and finally found out he was an extremely accomplished cricketer, fast bowler. And I just,
Wow.
things like that, I just love it, because you're suddenly like, oh, I get it.
Yeah.
But there's always a story behind it. And that is why, even if sometimes, the medicine we do can be quite routine, we sort of might get to a point where we feel quite confident in the medicine we're managing, but the whole patient story will never get boring. And there's always going to be that need to be curious and inquire and create a sort of environment which allows people to, I suppose, give away their real concerns. And so I think that has not disappointed, let's say.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And you're right. It is the bit that keeps you going, because it's not the disease, it's the person, and it's a different people. So it kind of, it almost, when you feel it's a motivation in work generally, because it waxes and wanes, doesn't it? And actually seeing the examples that you describe is exactly that. They kind of go, oh yeah, I know why I'm doing this now, and I'm actually quite enjoying it. And that was really interesting. So I love that. You have a real passion for clinic, like the clinical work and seeing patients. And I know you're a fairly newish partner, but sometimes partnership can move you away from the clinical stuff and more into a lot of managerial sort of things. How does that suit you? How do you find that?
It's interesting you asking that, and I'm thinking about that sort of on the spot, because I'm just over a year into partnership, and I absolutely do love that role as well.
Yeah.
And I suppose one thing is, it hasn't necessarily taken me away
Yeah.
from the patient care amount that I was doing. Perhaps I've upped my sessions a bit to account for that. But I think as well, partnership, as you know, is constantly about people as well,
Yes.
in a slightly different way. But also, I think in partnership, you can really be quite innovative and creative, and ideas can come to you, and you can think, oh, do you know what? I could talk to the partners about this. We can see if it could be something we could look into.
Yeah.
And an example of that from recent, for example, was we've moved to an online triage system, as I know lots of people have.
Yeah.
And we began to realise, as we all know, that there are some patients who come very frequently to our services. And we were able to run a little search and sort of identify those who were the most frequently. And then we just did this really cool little project where we thought, well, if someone's coming to the GP 60 times in the year, I think we have to be honest that we are not really meeting their needs.
Yeah.
We are not solving their situation. And maybe we can be, we can help them in a better way. And so it was just a really nice project that we could deliver, where we got our wellbeing advisor involved, and we just linked them in with her, and she spent some time for all sorts of different reasons. They were presenting frequently. But little projects like that you can sort of identify a problem and then work together as a team and generate a solution. Another one recently was to do with the pharmacy first scheme, where pharmacists can are now funded essentially to see some things. But I'd always found it a slightly clunky system, and you send people there and you've no idea what's happened. And so I just thought, do you know what? I think if I know the pharmacist and I've seen them and we've built up a
Yeah.
bit of rapport, this can work. And so I just sort of trotted around the pharmacies and again, just got that personal link then and sort of saying, look, please come back if you're worried. This is how to. So just things like that you think, you can see a problem, you can respond to someone else saying there's a problem,
Yeah.
and or a patient complaint or concern, and you can actually bring about a change, or at least try to go down that journey trying to.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that. And I guess in some ways it's the same thing. It's having that team around you. And so not necessarily making an impact just to one person, you're making it to a larger population, but you're doing it with this almost the same team that you have clinically, but they can come together and really brainstorm and problem solve about how we're going to make that better for everyone who's affected or whatever it might be. I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Emily, I have to ask because I'm listening to you and I'm like, oh my God, all these projects, all these like passionate things that you talk about and examples, and yet you do it with a really busy personal life, and either you're superwoman or you must have strategies on work-life balance that I need to hear about. What is it? How do you get the work-life balance? Do you feel like you've got work-life balance? Probably how I should start.
Um, do I feel like I've got work? We know each other here, I think. You know, honest reality is no, in the sense that there's a general bleeding of work into, and now that is a partnership that unforeseen things you
Yeah.
Japan sickness or whatever. I think when you feel quite driven and passionate about things, it's in your head, isn't it?
Yes.
I think it can be hard to switch off from that, and certainly I do try. For example, when I pick the kids up from school, I will try and hide my phone away for a couple of hours, and I don't always achieve it because
Yeah.
sometimes that's the reason why I can't, but I do try. But I have to make a very conscious effort. I think it's working out what refuels you, and I'm quite a simple creature in that way. For me, a walk with my little dog, or just something like that, or play some sport, or that kind of thing, that's the way that I will empty my head of all these concerns and things which you do have to let go because it's endless.
Yes.
There'll always be things to do, and so but I'll be honest, I haven't got it right. I'm aware of that, and there's always a rebalancing to be had, and sometimes it takes a holiday to sort of think, oh,
Yeah.
that got a bit out of hand, or whatever, uh, and it's also life, isn't it? We're all dealing with. I mean, just last night, my husband cut his chin open halfway through the afternoon.
Yes.
It's it's a constant, and sometimes I just think each day has and let's just deal with
A
today.
day at a time. Yeah.
And and then you know, I think there've been times when I've let the kids down, or I've dropped the ball administratively, and I've missed something that really matters to them. You didn't even know it was going to matter to them, and do force you to reset. But I would come back to what I said before, and you and I do this amazing job, really, but we can do it part time,
Yes.
and so if there is a little bit on top of that, I am still part time. And someone said to me the other day, part time is not what part time gets you is flexibility, and I think
Yes.
that is really how I see it. What that brings me is the ability to be flexible and say, okay, I normally don't work on a Wednesday, but there's an important meeting on a Wednesday, I'm going to work on a Wednesday, and the plus of that is I can do something else on a Friday, and just that, I think that's the way that I see it, but it's not for everyone, and I think certainly some people need to sort of compartmentalize and shut off a bit more. You know, it may be that you know, the way I'm managing things right now is not the way I want to do it forever. But again, there, you know, that flexibility is there. So
Yeah, I
um,
agree with you. It's the cushion, isn't it? So I sat down the other day and I started writing all the things I sort of find myself getting involved in. And I always kind of go, oh yeah, I just work 3 days a week. And I've always just said I work 3 days a week. And I'm like, actually, I don't work 3 days a week. And I think part of me getting stressed about not having enough time and not having balance is because I tell everyone I work 3 days a week and I tell myself I work 3 days a week, but I'm doing more than I'm actually saying. Whereas if I just accept that I definitely do more than that and I've got an idea of what that might look like, then there's no expectation. I'm not suddenly doing more than I expected to do because I just know that's what my baseline is. And it's interesting because I haven't changed anything, but actually just recognizing it makes me feel like I've got better balance. Um, and
I
it's go on.
yeah, I that's it, isn't it? 100%. Like, you know, sometimes I sort of think, oh, you know, is there something wrong with me that this week I've gone into work every day? And but again, like that sort of, I'm not counting the hours. I'm
Yeah,
making a decision each day what I'm doing, and sometimes you have to recalibrate that. But you know, I am a believer that we all do have some. We're not victims in that.
yeah,
And the flip side is, you know, we get involved in really interesting things that we choose to do. And you know, I think whatever pathway GP takes you on, those little opportunities will come along. You know, friends who've got portfolio careers and, you know,
yeah,
going off to the LMC conference, or you know, all sorts of things that people do, you know, up special services. That's, you know, if that's what you're motivated towards and you want to give to that, but there's nothing that's necessarily going to force you down that road.
yes,
uh,
yeah, absolutely. And I think it was really interesting because you sort of talk about headspace rather than, so part of me was going, was expecting you to give me the tips of, I have this type of calendar or I do this or and we're not getting that, are we? But I think it's really interesting that one of the first things that you said is I go for a walk because it gives me headspace, because actually there's always lots of things to do, and maybe it's the trick of managing it all isn't getting through that to-do list in a very tech way or clever way or strategic way. It's just having the headspace to feel that you've got your bucket is full and you'll get there at some point, and you might not, but such is life.
yeah, exactly. And again, I think that's, I always feel like the fact that I had 4 kids, for me, I suppose an element of chaos and loose ends is just part of life.
Yeah.
And for some people, that's not, you know, how they would want to live, because it would be quite stressful. And for me, that's okay. It does mean that every now and then things don't go according to plan or whatever. But yeah, it's never boring.
It's never boring. Have you always been a bit like that, Emily? Have you been sort of quite, you know, I don't want to put labels on things, but you get people who are more structured and people are more go with the flow. And have you kind of always been a bit more on that go with the flow type of thing?
I think I'm probably quite, yeah, intuitive, and um, yeah, I think that's sort of what you're getting at there, and not making decisions necessarily by kind of logic. So I think I have, but at the same time, in a way, I think I'm probably quite. I've always been quite driven and ambitious. So in that sense, the sort of, I'm not the
Yeah.
kind of laid back um, person. But again, I think different times in life put you in different
Yes.
chapters, don't they? And you know, I think for me doing VTS, I was hugely fortunate. I had all 4 children in that time,
Yeah.
and I look back and see how enormously well supported I was within the VTS programme, within job security, but also that ability to step away and step back in and
Yes.
do that in a safe way, that also meant I wasn't feeling guilty that that was the stage of life that I was in.
Yes.
And so again, that is why GP offers us all that sort of ability to respond to our life circumstances. And like you say, that choice to come into GP, I'm sure it was part of that. That was part of the reason why, and I think was the right decision, that I'm not doing A&E now. I'm still doing night shift, and although intuitively I thought I might have been able to manage that, reality is I think that would be very hard.
Yeah.
So, in many ways, we have a attainable job in general practice in many ways compared to some of our other hospital contemporaries, I would say.
I like that, glass half full rather than seeing all the negatives, actually, and certainly it should be that way, because there is lots to appreciate and value about general practice, which I think can sometimes get lost in the humdrum of everyday life and trying to get through things, as can't it, really? I guess that kind of very naturally leads me to ask about the future and what I just, there is so much going on in the general practice landscape, and what's going to happen to partnerships, what's going to happen to GPs in various roles and their sessional roles and their salaried roles. Are we all going to be taken over by ARRS? It can be a really demoralizing time, I think, as a GP, because there's clearly lots going on. What do you think? I mean, you're clearly really motivated, you're really passionate, you're enthusiastic in the sense, the partnership is new and you're getting, you're really getting getting into it, getting your teeth into it. Do you think it's here to stay? Do you think, what are your thoughts about sort of the GP landscape in the future?
Yeah.
It's not an easy question, I know, and
Yeah.
none of us know what's going to happen, but it'll just be interesting to hear.
So perhaps this is still naivety, but I think it's a little bit easier for me, having entered partnership already at a time where all of this is on the plate. This is already all happening.
Yeah.
PCM happened, R's are in place. And so you're deciding to get on a ship already heading in a certain direction, and therefore I suppose I've got that belief in the future. I've got that buy-in that
Yeah.
I'm on the ship. Now I don't in any way want to undermine people's concerns or the challenges, and every single GP practice is in a different situation with different challenges, and
Yeah.
no sense in which I would ever want to kind of undermine that. And there's a lot probably that I just haven't even got the insight into. But for myself and for our team, I actually feel personally very positive. And my reason for that is when I look back at what GP has always been, and my first GP placement as a medical student had a phenomenal placement, and again, at the time I saw this is like real using the mind to solve problems. This is not an easy job. This is fascinating, but at that time, really general practice was a building with X number of GPs sitting in that building and working together, some more than others, having meetings, but essentially that's really what it was, with obviously admin, nursing support and everything. But whereas now I feel like it's become so much richer, in the sense that a GP practice is not a collection of GPs. It's so much more than that. And we can be a kind of hub of care with different skill sets. We can be a training environment. We can, uh, find that patient who actually doesn't really need to see a GP again, but would really benefit from all the people we've already sort of touched upon, our wellbeing advisor. I'd love to see our roles expand a bit, love to have, great connections with all our other important allied dietitians. I would love to see, particularly with our practice population, and move
Yes.
into kind of facilitated group consultations, really innovative ways to kind of tackle chronic disease and behaviour change. And I personally think this is a much richer environment.
Yeah.
Problem I think we face is it's not well enough resourced, and this is where it falls down, because actually, if we GPs are going to have this, what I would say is really interesting role in terms of sort of leadership of the clinical team, obviously we need time and to be able to sort of supervise effectively our colleagues, paramedics, physician associates, whatever it is. We need to be able to have time to have our door open, and creating that culture where nothing's too silly to ask. We've got to be the ones who can make that happen and can be focused on people's development and investing in people and their skills. So in terms of what our service offer can look like,
Yeah.
I think it could be, just much more multifaceted. How we get there, and how that's resourced, and how we make that kind of transition, and how we avoid mistakes along the way, which potentially costly mistakes. I think that's a really huge question.
No, it's really true. It's really true, and you're right, because there are a lot of positives in terms of what we're able to offer. I quite like this idea of looking at it's almost like, you're right, you give this example of a ship and you can see the destination. And I guess being part of that ship means there is, and in many ways, maybe I'm just as naive as you, but there is some opportunity to be able to kind of have some ability to, be able to navigate that ship and control over where that might go. It was interesting times, I think.
Yeah, and what I would say on that one is I don't think you need to be in a particular role to achieve that. And I think even as a trainee, even as a student, one of our students did an amazing project for us this year. We had a leadership student, and I think anyone along that journey, there are ways in which partnership and things you have, but I think wherever you are in that journey, you can that role, you can grasp that nettle, you can you talk about having time to supervise people, or getting stuck in with those sorts of things. So I think that space is there across the board, really. And similarly, with ours colleagues, to sort of say, take a lead on projects, get everyone a bit fired up about it. Very much a sort of team effort in that way as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And really influence change. We are a strong cohort, GPs or medical students all the way up to general practice. We are an intelligent and strong cohort, and we can influence change. And I think sometimes we maybe forget that a little bit when everything around us seems to be going in a certain direction. I love, you have this lovely career in the sense that you see the best of what you're doing in general practice, and that's really heartwarming to hear. As you know, as I know, lots of people are not there, and they want to influence change in their own environment, or they want their environment to change, and that might be moving to a practice they're really happy at, or just finding the that right at the beginning we talked about the sort of the passion of what attracted you to GP, to re-find what that was for them. If you had any tips for someone, you know, and on that journey on the other side, and kind of finding that, what would you say? Do you have any sort of words of wisdom? That sounds very cliched, Emily, but you know, do you have any tips?
Well, we are recording in Croydon, obviously, so I don't, you know, but I would say this is a very cool place to work. I do think that. And I think across Croydon, you've got a whole spectrum of places to kind of pick and choose from that are very, very different in their patient demographic, in their, you know, the way their practices are run, you know, super practices and small single-handed practice, you know, there's everything. And so, you know, I think getting in there, but it's establishing what your values are. And this is always a hard bit, isn't it, when it comes to going forward and having interviews and work, you know, actually in the number of interviews that I've done, I've been impressed if we've actually been able to say, this is what I can kind of offer. This is what I'm looking for. And I think that negotiating space, when you've got the willingness to a little bit of kind of to and fro on things. And so, you know, I think the opportunities really are there to find something that suits. And certainly, I can't remember if you did it, but things like the Spin Fellowship.
Yes, I did, yeah.
Yeah, that was I found that such a great chance to focus on something that I wanted to develop clinically. And for me, that was the women's health. And, you know, just push on a few doors. And then I think you start to really find out what you do enjoy, and what, you know, means that you can get up in the morning and think, I like my job, you know. I've got a job that I consider to be worthwhile, you know, and carve that out. But you know, I know as well, you know, that can take time. It doesn't always happen to the timescale that you want it to. Sometimes there's patience, sometimes there's needing to keep trying and keep knocking on different doors, and that's not easy. But yeah, I think that's what I would say. And I am quite a believer in finding a little clinical niche that you quite like, and I think that's always something that you can do, because then you can just feel like you've got a little zone where, you know, maybe your colleagues, you can support your colleagues because it's not an area they're so confident in, and you know, really speak confidently to patients, you know, offer them, you know, a greater confidence in kind of what you're doing. So I've liked that, and then it energizes you for the areas that you don't feel, you know, you've got quite the same amount to offer.
It's building that fuel up, isn't it, for the rest of it? And that's what having a niche does, because you know you just enjoy it and it makes you feel empowered. Because you do have that, it brings up, you know, when other colleagues are asking you about how you might manage X, Y, and Z, and that is your expertise and it's recognised, it can be really empowering. I love that, Emily. This is actually not your working day, clearly. So I am going to let you get back to having that work-life balance where you're not working and doing a podcast with me. But I just want to say thank you. It's actually been really lovely, and it's almost listening to you has reminded me of so many things that, you know, you forget it in the sort of humdrum of everyday clinical practice. But you know, revisiting why someone wants to go into general practice, or how they manage to keep that passion alive as they go through their career, is really, it's effective and it's heartwarming. So I just want to say thank you again for coming on and speaking to our viewers.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.